Hello, friends, and welcome back to Market Shares. I'm your host, Tony Blodgett, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about the potential challenges with being a landlord. Now, over the years, I've owned a lot of real estate, and I've sold a lot of real estate, and I would say that right now my strategy around real estate is, I don't own a lot of real estate today, and mainly because the challenges with being a landlord. Now, I know this is, this may surprise a lot of people because I believe in home ownership. Matter of fact, I think that owning a home can be one of the best investments that you could ever have. And for me personally, I've gained a lot of wealth over the years through owning real estate. But I got to a point for me personally, and this isn't for everybody, I hope people can learn from some of the challenges that I've dealt with on how to be a better landlord. But for me, it's been a challenge. And so I'm just going to take you through some of what I've experienced. I'm going to share with you something that I just dealt with this weekend, actually, on a property that we were looking to sell. And just a few things that maybe you might think about if you're going to be a real estate investor. Now, first thing I would say is that, like I mentioned, I bought my first home. I was 21 years old. And when I bought my second home, I converted what was my primary residence into a rental. That was my first kind of soiree, if you will, into being a landlord. And I had no idea what I was doing. Matter of fact, that first property, I sold it on a lease with an option to purchase, which is a great strategy. I ended up actually getting a large down payment, above market rent, and ultimately got the house back, which was really the goal when you do a lease with an option like that. But so that one worked out pretty well. But over the years, even with that house, I've had some challenging renters over the years, people that didn't pay rent, people that destroyed the property. And, but I decided that, in my early, late 20s, early 30s, one of my strategies was going to be to acquire as many properties as I could afford to purchase. And that's what I did. I think we at one point had 7 rental properties. And, as much as and that was a bad time because I bought a bunch of them in 07, right? Then the market crashed. So that kind of aside, I don't think that happens very often. I don't foresee that in the future. So that forced me to be a landlord for about 10 years minimum in order just to get the equity to come back and be in a position where I could sell. But this episode's more about the challenges and the things I've learned about being a landlord. And the first thing that I want to mention is I would highly recommend working with a management firm if you're going to have rental properties. Now, some people think, look, it's not that big of a deal. I can manage this on my own. And I suppose that for some people that might go very well. But for me, I found that the one thing that has probably made me the most jaded about managing real estate is when I took on that responsibility myself versus just paying somebody to do it for me. What I found with having a property management company is that they do a lot of the scrubbing for you up front, right? They'll run the credit reports. You give them the criteria on what you're looking for a renter, and you obviously have to follow landlord-tenant laws and so on and so forth. But they do all the screening for you. It takes the emotion out of the decision because what I found for me is I'm kind of a softie, and I would meet somebody, and they would need some special accommodations or whatnot on the property, and my inclination, especially once I met them, was I wanted to help, and sometimes having being a little bit soft is great in most aspects of our life. And when it comes to managing property, I think you got to set the rules, stand by those rules, and then have a property management that will stay firm with those things. So that would be the first thing that I would recommend is I would personally, if I was going to have more rentals, which I do have a couple today, is I would work with a property management company. Yes, it's going to cost a little bit of money, but in my opinion, it's going to take all the other headaches out of it. The other thing that I've realized, and this is what brings me to the story that I'm going to share with you this weekend, is my wife has a rental property and has had it for 10 years. And in this particular situation, this person paid their rent every single month. Everything was fine. And when they first moved into the property, everything, seemed good as well. But what we didn't know is that the person, had not been keeping up on the property. And that's a wild understatement. I don't want to go into all the details, but the bottom line is we went to do an inspection of the property because frankly, we were going to sell it. And we realized the level of disrepair that the home was in. It was basically kind of like a hoarder situation, and the home now is frankly just needs completely redone. Okay, so the house was essentially destroyed. And what this brings me to is that there has to be an inspection of a property once a year at minimum, in my opinion. Now, again, there's landlord-tenant rules. There's timelines of notification that you have to give. But this idea that you can just trust that someone's going to treat your home the way that you would, you just can't count on that happening. Unfortunately, I wish that you could. But the few times that I've been in a really bad situation with a rental property, it was because I did not view the home on a fairly regular basis, and the home was in such disrepair at the time that I got it back that I had to invest tens of thousands of dollars to renovate. And I'm not talking just paint and carpet. I'm talking like, moldings were gone, or there had been I had one where the shower had been leaking and the whole bathroom was rotted out. And had someone just simply told me that this was happening, or had I visited the home and did a visual inspection, I would have seen it. I would have sent a repair person out and we could have mitigated that. But by letting years and years pass before ever stepping foot in that property again, it's turned out to burn me on a number of occasions. And that's really what I want this episode to be about, is that, look, owning real estate for many people is probably the only way that you can leverage yourself into creating a significant amount of wealth. So I don't want to deter people from being a landlord or from owning investment properties. I just want you to think about it and not make the same mistakes, frankly, that I've made over the years. And I would say at the very top of your list is have a property management company. And second on that list, which your property management company should be doing this, but I would ask for a personal visual inspection of that property at minimum on an annual basis. Walk through, put your eyes on everything, look for leaks, look for any sort of infestation that might be in that property, look for things that are, deferred maintenance, how are they treating your home, so on and so forth. And make sure that they're adhering to your rental contract. I mean, it's important that you have, in my opinion, a very tight, tough, let's say, rental contract if you want to make sure that your home is preserved. But then you have to hold your tenants accountable to adhering to what's in those agreements. And the only way to do that is by checking in and viewing the property. Now, look, you can't just stop by the home, even though you own it. You don't get to do that, right? There's notice that you have to give. It's probably different in every state, would be my guess. So you have to know what the rules are as far as notification, when you can walk the property, so on and so forth. But you absolutely do have the right to access your property. It just needs to be with proper notice. And the nice thing about a property management company is they'll know all these rules, right? You can just reach out to them and say, hey, I want to do an inspection of the property. They'll make sure that they know what the rules are. They'll make sure that notification is given, so on and so forth. A few other things that I want to mention, only because these have come up in conversation. So I had a friend of mine reach out to me recently, and he said, look, Tony, I've owned my home now for a few years. I have quite a bit of equity. And so I want to pull out some money and I want to buy an investment property. And I was like, that can be a great idea. Let's talk about that. What are you thinking? And he goes, well, I actually think, we live here in Washington State. And he said, I actually want to buy something like in the Midwest. I know there's some markets out there where you can buy a home for like $100,000, $120,000. And so I'll just pull the, $120,000 out of my house. I'll pay cash for it. And then, I'll be able to just earn that rent free and clear. And I'm like, okay, let's talk about this for a minute. Now it's 2025. And if you're in a market, I'm not going to call it any specific markets, but if you're in any market across the United States and homes are worth $120,000 to $150,000, the chances of that home appreciating at any, remarkable number is pretty low. There's lots of markets around the country where values haven't gone up that much, but yet you can make good rent on those properties. So to me, that's like a cash flow kind of an investment, right? Where a lot of people are buying real estate, putting as little down as possible to control as large of an asset as possible or reasonable. And then that home goes up in value. Now you're getting a significant return through appreciation of that property. Most of these homes you're going to buy that are very, very inexpensive don't have the same opportunities for appreciation because of where they're located. So for this gentleman, I was doing the math and I'm like, so you're going to do a second mortgage. In this case, he wanted to do a second mortgage because he had a 3.25% on his first mortgage. And I don't know, interest rates on second mortgages, I'm not quoting a rate here, but they're probably in the 10s, right? I mean, 9 to 11, somewhere in that neighborhood. And so I'm like, so you can rent it out, you can pay cash for it, you can rent it out for $1,000, $1,200 a month, which seems like really good rent for a $100,000 house. But at that interest rate, I mean, at best, you're making like 1%. I mean, I just like that rent's not even going to cover the payment on your home equity line that you're pulling out. And so, there's no leverage involved. Like it seemed like a good idea, I think, in his mind because, well, look, I'll just own the house free and clear and then it'll be all cash. So my recommendation to him was, okay, well, if you really want to buy real estate, first of all, I've owned property out of state and there can be some cash flow benefits to that. But I'll tell you, in my personal opinion, it's really hard to do a walkthrough on a home that's on the other side of the country. I want something local where I know the market, where I can go touch and feel the home if I need to, where I can do a walkthrough, right? So that would be my first reason not to buy something out of state. Second of all, you just have to run the numbers. Owning real estate for the sake of owning real estate, if you're not an expert in this area, you need to talk to someone who can help you walk through the logic that you're thinking, because in his mind, it seemed like a good idea. And by the time we got off the phone, he's like, yeah, that's a horrible idea. Well, what should I do? I said, well, maybe you could take $100,000 and instead of pay cash for a home, you could put 25% down on a $400,000 home, right? Or maybe you could get a situation where you could buy a larger, fourplex, something like that, right? And put 10% down or 25% down and buy something that's $800,000, and then you control that. You have more renters, you have more opportunity. So we just talk through some of the strategies. And I just think that that's an important thing to walk through with an expert who can give you some of this advice, because just, having the idea that I need to own more real estate and it seems easier to get into a lower priced property, that might not yield you the best. And you got to think 5 years, 10 years down the road. And I asked him, I said, look, are you looking to build wealth or are you looking for a cash flow situation? What's important to you? And he said, well, building wealth over time is important. I said, okay, well then let's get you leveraged into a larger asset that has the opportunity to appreciate and grow and really multiply your investment. So just, don't just go buy real estate because you think that, I need to have real estate in my portfolio. There really is strategies that will work if you spend the time and figure out what's going to work for what your goals are. The other thing is, deciding, do I want single family or do I want multifamily? And if you decide on multifamily, I know a lot of great investors who've only purchased duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, like that's their jam. That's all they buy is multi-unit. And I think there's a lot of logic to that. But you might have to wait a little bit longer, right? You might have to put a little bit more money down on a property like that. But I think there's some benefits to it. First of all, you're, again, controlling a larger asset. And you got to remember that when a house goes up in value, it's based on the value of the home. So if a $200,000 house goes up to $250,000, then you just made $50,000 in equity, and you could have bought that home, with only $50,000 down and you just made $50,000. That's 100% return on your money. And so that's where the leverage, comes into this game. So thinking about how much money would I need to put down to purchase a multi-unit. The other benefit of that is if you have a single family home, and I've been through this, I've been down this road multiple times. If you have a single family home and there's a vacancy, you have zero rent coming in. If you have a fourplex and you have a vacancy, you've only lost 25% of your rent at any given time. And so the ability to continue your cash flow with multi-unit is so much greater than if it's a single family home, especially if someone does significant damage to the property. And I'd like to say that doesn't happen very often. I don't know the stats on this. All I know is anecdotally what I've dealt with is pretty much every home at some point or another that I've owned has needed significant renovation at some point in its life. Sometimes it's right before I go to sell it. Sometimes, I've had to renovate them just so that I could get another renter in there. And maybe that's just my string of bad luck. But it has driven my opinion, if you will, on being a landlord. And I tell everybody now to be cautious and really think about what it is that you want to do. So with that being said, you guys, I'm not down on owning real estate. I just want you to be careful. And I also want to point out, as someone who has a lot of experience doing this, is that it's not all roses and rainbows. It's not easy to be a landlord, and you have to be prepared for what it is you're going into. You have to know the landlord-tenant rules in your area. There might be some based on certain cities, certain counties, certain states, and there's federal laws. So make sure you know what those are. In my opinion, the best way to make sure you're sticking to all of the rules is to work with a property management company, because they will ensure that you don't get off track with what you're doing. There's a lot of rules around discrimination. There's a lot of rules around notification. There's a lot of rules around equal housing. There's things that you might not think about, and why would you if you don't know these things? So hiring a professional, at least in the beginning, I think is a great way to go. Make sure that you have a very thorough rental agreement. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of things that are on a rental agreement. So, we've allowed pets to be in some of our properties. We've allowed pets. And look, I have 2 dogs. I love dogs. I love animals. But not everyone, treats their animals or takes care of their animals or picks up after their animals in the same way, right? And so you don't know what you're getting into when you allow your tenant to have animals. So, for instance, we have some rules around, you can have mid-size dogs. They need to be spayed and neutered, and they can be your family pet. But you might think, well, that's pretty specific. Well, do you want someone having, like breeding puppies, breeding cats, breeding animals in your home? I mean, maybe you're okay with that. But if you're not specific in your rental agreement, then that can happen. Vehicles, being specific about how many vehicles can be parked at the property. We have rules in our rental agreement that say every vehicle that's on the property, first of all, there's a limit to how many vehicles. Second of all, they all need to be running and operational. Thirdly, they all have to have current tabs. They have to be registered and legal to drive at any given time. Now, why are these things important? Like, if there's room, you're like, well, Tony, there's plenty of room. I could have a couple cars there. Well, have you ever had a tenant move out and abandon their property? Because I have multiple times. And dealing with a car that gets left behind, that isn't running, that hasn't been licensed, that's a massive nuisance, for you to deal with. You got lost title issues, and, you got to call the sheriff, and you got to do all these things, file reports, et cetera. So these are just the things that, unfortunately, I've been burned on, and I want to bring them up, because if you're in the mindset of, I want to become a landlord, I need to own real estate, these are just a few things that I hope that you think about. And I would watch other videos. I would talk to other people that have been landlords and really understand, like, what are the potential pitfalls that I could deal with? What are What are the potholes that I don't want to run over that I might deal with if I become a landlord? And just know that, like any other investment, it can be very lucrative, but there can also be significant downsides. And I would say that one of the biggest mistakes I see people do when they acquire real estate is they've already stretched their budget to the max, and they don't have any reserves. You know, most loan programs are going to require you to have some reserves in the bank, and reserves are important because if someone ruins a house to the point that it's uninhabitable by a new tenant, you have to get that, fixed back up to be able to get it back on the market, or, you have to make double mortgage payments. I mean, things can go sideways quickly, and there's ways of mitigating that. So hopefully this gives you a couple things to think about. If it scares you a little bit about being a landlord, good. Not because I want you to not do it, but because I want you to go into it eyes wide open, and I want you to think about what are the potential things that could go wrong and what can I do up front to mitigate that risk so that you don't deal with some of the challenges that I've dealt with over the years with being a landlord, which for me has frankly soured my approach. I should have more real estate in my portfolio, and I don't because of the challenges that I've had. And had I always had a property management company, had I always been super strict with how I did my leases and did follow up and toured the home at least once a year and all those things, I'd probably have a different opinion. But I learned the hard way, and I don't want you to have to go through that as well. So hopefully this gives you some takeaways. I do encourage you to invest in real estate. I do think that it can help you build wealth over time, but do it smart, do it careful, seek the advice of a professional, and good luck if that's the path that you choose to go down. Just be careful and know what you're doing. So thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this episode of Market Shares. Sometimes we have guests on. Sometimes I talk about personal stories like this one that I've been through. But either way, our goal is to help you build your market share. So please share this episode with someone that you know in mortgage or real estate, or if someone's talking about becoming a landlord or converting their primary residence into a rental, maybe share this episode. Give them something to think about as they go on and embark on that new journey. And until next time, take care.